Hello friends, so sorry for the false start. A cold, family life, and Dungeons & Dragons got in the way, but here I am finally with another episode of Warcraft III Easter eggs. So without any ado whatsoever, let's look at some secrets behind the models of the game. The level designers weren't the only ones who liked to hide secrets in Warcraft 3. The artists had a lot of fun as well. Let's look a bit closer at some of the models and check out some that never made it into the final cut of the game. Now, as a note, Warcraft 3 went through several drafts before it became the strategy RPG it is today. In the alpha version of the game, Blizzard wanted to redefine the strategy game genre, and as a result began with a completely different concept. There were a lot of different models back then, as you can see in these screenshots, but I simply don't have time to look into them in depth in this video. I would recommend visiting the Hive Workshop's Warcraft 3 pre-release material thread by Fury if you want to take a look at a bunch of screenshots, trailers, and photos that show what Warcraft 3 was originally intended to be like. Like my original Easter egg series of the campaigns, I hope you gain a higher appreciation of Blizzard from watching these extra videos. However, they might also benefit you if you want to use the models in more versatile ways while playing around with the world editor. First of all, there are a couple of interesting animations that are largely unused throughout the game. First is an animation called Stand Hit that several units have in the game files. Apparently it was an animation that triggered when the unit was hit by an attack, making them flinch. These are the units I could find that have this animation type, and as you can see, many of them are glitched. Also, just as a side note, when I use the term model in this piece, I mean the actual model file in the game. Some models are skinned differently, but have the same animations, such as the different colors of trolls, so I group them all into the same category unless I say otherwise. Another unused animation is the Stand Victory animation. This animation is used several times in the campaigns for cinematic value, but as far as I can tell, it never had a mechanical purpose. Here are the units who have victory animations. I'm a bit confused at this selection. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason about which models got victory animations and which ones did not. So, starting with odd unit animations, the Rifleman actually has this spell animation. Riflemen don't have any active spells, but it almost looks like a flare ability like the Mortar team has. You could also probably wire it in the world editor to make him fire a grenade or something in an arc, judging by the way he's pointing his boomstick. The Sorceress has a channel spell animation despite not actually having any channel spells, so any spell that required her to maintain concentration on a spell could be flawlessly added to her model in the world editor if you wanted. Speaking of Sorceresses, because of the new Blood Elf race, she's wearing red as a secondary color, but if you change your model to the Reign of Chaos version in the world editor, you can change her back to a gray trim instead. The same goes for the Priest and Dragonhawk Rider if you don't like their Blood Elf forms. You may have also noticed that from Reign of Chaos to Frozen Throne, most of the siege units had a change in their model as well. I always wondered why this significant yet quiet change was made, and it turns out it was to avoid litigation with companies like Wizards of the Coast and Warhammer Fantasy. Owlbear's names were changed to Wildkins, the boots of Elvenkind were changed to the boots of Quel'Thalas, steam tanks were changed to siege engines, and gyrocopters were changed back to their Warcraft 2 name of flying machines. They even had to change ballistas to glaive throwers, though I personally don't understand how you can copyright a war machine invented in 400 BC. From there, Blizzard probably thought it was just as well, they may as well update the catapult into a demolisher. Before the steam tank was even called a steam tank, early tooltip and model data indicates that it was called a war wagon. Back then, rather than being basically an armored cannon, it was instead an armored transport that riflemen could garrison inside and fire out of. Essentially a moving burrow. That would have been pretty awesome, but for some reason, probably complexity, they changed it to the artillery vehicle we know of now. Spellbreakers were originally called spell thieves, and as their animation set indicates, they used to have a magic defense ability, where they could raise their shield much like a footman and become immune to spells while moving more slowly. Eventually they were changed to be passively immune to magic all the time, but the ability is still found in the world editor, and giving a Spellbreaker unit the defend ability will work as far as their animation goes. The Dragonhawk Riders, originally called Dragonhawks in Reign of Chaos, have identical models besides their red color and a new channel animation for their new spells, but they have different portraits, and I personally really hate their new one. They don't even move their mouths and bob their heads like a Power Ranger. I also like their old voice set better.
I'm going for an even bigger role in the expanded expansion pack.
Paladins. Now here's something of interest. If you've zoomed in during a game, you may have noticed that Paladins books have the word Sam in them. This is almost certainly a nod to Samwise Didier, who is the senior art director of the game. However, there are several Paladin variant models in the game, with variant books to match. The black-haired Paladin's book is unchanged, but the white-haired Paladin says Ozzy in it. Samwise loves metal, as you can tell by his cover of Power of the Horde, and thus put this in as a tribute to Ozzy Osbourne. Arthas's says Matt O. Rue W in it, a token of Blizzard artists Matt Orsburn and Rue Weerasuriya, and Uther's seems to have the letters T and J in it, likely left there by the artist Trevor Jacobs. Another interesting secret is that when Arthas gets Frostmourne, his model now holds his book upside down when casting, a chilling foreshadowing of his turning his back on the light if ever there was one. The Paladins have an unused channel animation as well, and they have different armor styles besides their beard colors if you notice. Dalen Proudmoore is loosely based on the Paladin model, though his spellcasting is a bit different, but I was really disappointed that his cape doesn't show the actual Kulturas crest on it. That would have been a great Easter egg for those who've looked at the Warcraft II manual. I knew fairly early on that Sylvanas was based on Chandris Feathermoon's model, or vice versa, but I didn't realize that both of them have nearly the exact same animations as the Elven Archer unit. The Dark Ranger, previously called a Banshee Ranger, has only one difference. The spell animation looks more suited to channeling for life drain. Also, Chandris shoots 2 of her arrows backwards in her victory animation. Most likely an intentional animation, as Sylvanas's are completely normal. Water elementals have a weird quirk with their coloring, but I can't figure out how to explain it, and I may not even understand it completely. Suffice it to say that their bracers react oddly with vertex coloring and tinting. The riderless horse unit has the exact same animations as the knight unit, and the pack horse is almost the same, except it seems to hang its head a bit more. Poor little beast of burden. The Phoenix has a death animation, which is interesting. Normally, it only dies if you destroy it in egg form, but this allows you to make a Phoenix without the egg ability and it'll still work okay. As I mentioned in one of the addendum videos, this Blood Elf wagon has this counterpart called Illidan wagon that you can put in your maps by typing this as the model used. I never realized this until now, but bandits are based completely on the Footman model, complete with a defend animation option available to them. No natural bandit creeps have defend, but you could program it into a custom map flawlessly. Looking at the ship units in the game, it turns out that frigates used to be called destroyers to match their name in Warcraft II. I was a bit disappointed they stuck with frigates. Also, the battleships of both the Night Elves and the Alliance have birth animations for an unknown reason, though this could make for a pretty funny cutscene. So, onto the buildings. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but buildings all have foundations under the ground in order to make them look better when built on slopes. Rarely are any slopes that steep in campaigns or melee maps, but here are a few of the more interesting foundations if you're curious. As indicated in the game, the High Elven Barracks building was once called a Mage Tower, and it was apparently the original building for training priests and sorceresses, later replaced by the Arcane Sanctum. Having a Mage Tower would have matched it closer to Warcraft II, so I'm a bit disappointed in their final decision. But the High Elf Barracks still doesn't look as cool as the Mage Towers in Warcraft II did, so oh well. Also, the Emissary unit, this human-looking priest, has the internal name of Human Mage, indicating that it may have been a replacement for the Sorceress of Priest model in an earlier version. The Grain Warehouse building is only seen once in the human campaign, but it has a construction animation where it slowly inflates like a bouncy house. And finally, this odd unit is in the human files on the world editor and is called Icy Treasure Box. It's just as durable as a magic vault, but it's not a treasure box at all, it's a Frostmourne pedestal. It has this breaking ice animation when killed, but despite its tooltip saying, "A treasure lies frozen within," making it drop an item is kinda clunky. As far as I know, it's never used in any campaign. I can't help but wonder if peons were the first models created in the game, because their animations are uniquely named. Instead of stand 1, stand 2, etc. like every other model in the game, their stand animations are named things like itch head, stretch, and talk gesture. This never would have held up for the countless other models in the game, so this system seems to have been scrapped immediately. Also, I find it a bit odd that the head of the pickaxe matches the peon's skin color. And this Attack 2 animation is hilarious, I never noticed it before, getting his pickaxe stuck in the enemy like that. Grunts have a cool spell animation. Judging by some old data in the beta, this ability was likely called Blood Rage, and it goes well with Frenzy or other abilities built into the game. Kodo Beasts used to be called Koto Beasts, judging by some sound and model names in the game data. Also, they, along with some other random models, have different walk speeds for some reason, as if their once animations differentiated between walking and sprinting. Judging by the way some of the animations are named channel, the drum's ability wasn't always passive. You used to be able to turn it on and off, possibly draining mana as long as you were boosting allies' attack. Besides the rider-specific animations, the riderless Kodo Beast is for the most part the same, but for some reason it doesn't have a barf animation. If you've read the Warcraft 3 manual or information on the online wiki, you'll know this already, but the symbol on the Blade Master's flag is that of the Burning Blade clan. Grom Hellscreams is the Warsong clan's flag, and Jubathos of the Blackrock clan, sure enough, has the same Blackrock clan flag, all from Warcraft 2. Man, I loved those flags as a kid. I miss the focus on clans and alliances, and I wish the Night Elves and Scourge had different denominations too. Going back to catapults, if my Warcraft 3 game box is any indicator, peons used to push the catapults into battle in the beta. I always thought it'd be cool if more games did this instead of making the catapults seemingly sentient, but it probably overcomplicated their movement animation and whatnot. Gold mines look different too, and look at this blue necropolis. Some beta screenshots confirm these all look different. Wind Riders used to be called Wyvern Riders, and they have an unused spell animation where it looks like the Wyvern tries to sting a target. I learned when looking at some custom maps in the Reign of Chaos days that Serpent Ward was originally an existing model before the expansion, but went unused. Back then it was called Ancestral Spirit or Ancestral Guardian, and was the ward that Witch Doctors had instead of Healing Ward. Also, the Shadow Hunter hero that uses them now was actually one of the early heroes in the beta version of the game, but he was apparently put on reserve for the expansion. Also, he used to have a mask over his face like this. They apparently wanted his face to be more visible as a hero, but I'm not entirely sure why. They sure didn't seem to care about giving Priestesses of the Moon an identity. Their icon and hero model puts so much emphasis on the white tiger, I never really knew what to imagine Tyrande is looking like. Speaking of wards, did you know there's a monster lure ward in the game's files? It looks like this, and I've used it a couple times as a mana ward to sidekick the healing ward in maps that I've made. The game's files say it's supposed to lure monsters to it, but it has no effect, so it must have been scrapped at some point in the process. I'm not sure what the point of luring monsters would have been anyway. Maybe it was to lure creeps and make creeping easier with towers or something? Anyway, its unique model is at your disposal in the world editor at any rate. The Chaos Warlord character was apparently playable at some point, given his sound set.
The ground shall run red with blood!
And he was called an Orc Warlord in the beta. In the current file, his name is Mathog, but in the campaign he's only known as Slave Master. It's interesting that he seems to be the only orc who rides a horse instead of a wolf. I thought that maybe given his station as Slave Master, maybe he stole it from Strongbrad, but older screenshots show him riding it. And look at that horse. That horse is clearly evil. Orc Warlock's spell animation is called Call Storm, and sure enough, there's an old beta or alpha level spell called Call Storm. There's an icon for it, but it's unknown what it did. It's also interesting to me that Warlocks had shaman spells. Perhaps this was an early model for shamans or something, because what looks like shamans in the past were actually called Spirit Walkers. Spirit Wolves have an animation for doing critical strike, but they also have another spell animation that shows them howling. Perhaps at one point they had a roar ability instead of invisibility, but the consensus among summoned units in the game now shows that Blizzard tended to prefer them to have autocast or passive abilities for less micromanagement. The Timber and Direwolf models have similar animations as well, except for lack of special effects associated with them. And they also have a birth animation, suggesting that the Spirit Wolf model was created first and these followed suit. Some evidence suggests that the War Mill model used to be more lumber mill-like and that it was not originally a lumber mill/blacksmith combo, but two separate buildings just like the humans have and matching the situation in Warcraft 2. Lastly, there's a completely unused secret unit for the orcs, the Berserker. I think it actually would be kind of cool were it not for the stupid clown hair, but you can put it in your map if you want using this path as the model type for a custom unit. Once when I was making a Warcraft 1 remake in Warcraft 3, I tried to make a slime creep and found out something really stupid.